Hello, welcome to First Chapter Friday. My name is Giles and I work at the Downtown Reno Library. Today the book I'm reading is called The Girl with the Ghost Machine. It's written by Lauren DeStephano and published by Bloomsbury Press. This book is a 2021 Nevada Young Reader nominee for the intermediate category. So I'm going to read a little bit from the flap here. Papa, what will this machine do? His answer was simple. It will summon ghosts. When Emmeline Beaumont's father starts building a ghost machine, she doesn't believe it will bring her mother back from the dead. But Monsieur Beaumont is so desperate that he's done nothing but toil away on the contraption year after year. And so here we start with chapter 1 from The Girl with the Ghost Machine. Emmeline Beaumont was 10 1/4 when her father started building the ghost machine. It was 1 month after her mother's funeral exactly. To some, the pursuit of ghosts might have seemed greedy, given all that life had to offer. There was no shortage of living things in the world, to be sure. Even the rabbits that chewed through their vegetable garden, the chipmunks that left holes in the dirt, the Rousseau family across the valley whose records played at all hours, and whose children drew pictures in the fog of their breath on every window from St. Lawrence Street to the school. But when Emmeline's mother, Margot Beaumont, died, it seemed as though everything else had died with her. Emmeline and her father could no longer see the colors in the trees. They could no longer hear the melody in the music. The vegetable garden became overrun by weeds, and the carrots and the tomatoes turned gray and shriveled. Emmeline herself hardly spoke in the first month after her mother's death, sustaining herself on the chocolate cherries her mother had hidden under the sink, salting them with her tears. Every day since her mother's death, Emmeline wore a single black lace glove on her left hand, closest to her heart. The curtains were always drawn and the house was always dark. This was before Emmeline's father got the idea of the ghost machine. One day, 2 months after Emmeline's mother had died, and neither Emmeline nor her father had left the house but to retrieve the mail, Mademoiselle Chavreau, who taught at the school, hammered the iron knocker on the door until at last someone answered. "Enough of this now, enough!" Mademoiselle Chavreau had cried. "You can't have that child living in a morgue. She needs to be in school." And so Emmeline returned to her lessons, and when she came home in the afternoons, sunlight filled her light, honey-colored hair. The smell of autumn burrowed in the fibers of her sweater. She was brimming with jokes and whispers and giggles she had collected all day like stones in her pockets. And it was then, just as life had begun to make sense to Emmeline again, that the ghost machine came about. She returned from school one afternoon to find her father in the basement, crouched over scraps of metal, foraging through jars of bolts and rusted nails. Soon thereafter, Julien became the subject of whispers and rumors on St. Lawrence Street. He shuttered himself in the basement for hours each day, and all anyone heard was the clang and clatter of machinery and the occasional muttered curse. Some believed the loss of his wife had driven him mad. Neighbors would knock on the door bearing covered dishes and freshly baked treats, all hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever he did in that gloomy house. But if he answered the door at all, it was never for more than a fleeting moment, just long enough to mutter a word of thanks. At 10 1/4 years old, Emmeline was old enough to know that a ghost machine wasn't a very realistic idea. The world was filled with bolts and gears and flickering light bulbs, and if these things could somehow summon ghosts, it surely would have happened by now. But still she had hoped, despite all reason, that it might work. The house was quiet and lonely without her mother to straighten its picture frames and draw its curtains and fill the rooms up with her humming. Now dishes piled in the sink, and the kitchen table was littered with bills and cards expressing sympathy, and an uncapped jar of honey whose contents had dribbled out onto the week-old newspaper resting beneath it. And though the idea of summoning ghosts sounded rather odd, Emmeline knew also that there was nothing odd about her father. Rather, he had loved her mother very much. Margot Beaumont had left them quite suddenly after a short and unexpected illness, and there simply hadn't been time to prepare for such tremendous sorrow. When Margot died, Her coffee cup was still in the sink, soaking in pink suds that shined and shimmered. Her slippers were neatly placed near the bathtub, and an oval nest of her fine gold hair was still caught in the brush beside the bathroom sink. And so when her father began collecting pieces for the machine, Emmeline helped him. She brought him little rusted gears and nails, things she found on the side of the road mostly, and discarded paper clips that were bent out of shape. She collected and rinsed out empty marmalade jars and cans, all the while knowing that these mundane things could not possibly bring her mother back. Even so, the small bit of hope was what made her go on foraging for supplies. One afternoon, she pushed an old deflated tire up the steps. Her father was so pleased by this offering that he hugged her until her feet left the ground, and he twirled her across the kitchen and kissed the top of her hair. That was when she asked him, "Papa, what will this machine do?" His answer was simple. "It will summon ghosts." "But how, Papa?" "Think of the puddles in the street after it rains," her father said. "Where do they go?" "I suppose they disappear," Emmeline answered. He tapped her nose. "They don't disappear. They evaporate. The clouds gather them up, and when it's time, they come back again as rain. Your mother is just like that." "Mama is in a cloud?" Emmeline asked, skeptical. "She's not in a cloud exactly," her father said, "but she's somewhere out there, where things go when it seems like they've disappeared. She can't come back and live with us because her body is gone now, but bodies aren't the most important part of us. The special part, the true part, evaporates when we die. This machine will bring that part back. As to how it will work, that is a small matter to sort out." Her father waved his hand as though swatting away a fly. "It will all make sense once it's done. You'll see." At first, the machine was strictly off limits. Emmeline could hear her father tinkering and toiling, very rarely shouting, often grumbling, behind the closed door of the basement. Emmeline had never particularly liked the basement. It was dark and damp and full of spiders. But whenever she brought her father pieces for his machine, she found herself trying to peer into the dark stairwell over his shoulder, wanting to catch a glimpse of the thing that had come to consume him. But he always closed the door before she could see. With time, her father became as inaccessible as the machine. He stopped answering the door when she knocked. He was still in the basement when Emmeline returned home from school in the afternoons. At 3:05 precisely, she would leave a sandwich on a plate at the top of the stairs. She would knock on the basement door only once, for she knew her father would know what it meant. Sometimes her father would retrieve the sandwich promptly. But sometimes, in fact, most times, the sandwich was still there in the evening when Emmeline emerged from her bath and had begun to prepare for bed. "Good night, Papa," Emmeline would say on such occasions. The only response would be the clatter and clamor of tools and gears. Faced with the quiet of an empty house, Emmeline began to grieve for her father as well. He was still alive, but he was as gone as the dead for as little as she saw of him. Late one night, kept awake by the thunking and banging in the basement, she climbed out of her bed and made her way to the basement and threw open the door. Her father didn't notice at first, lost as he was in his work. He didn't hear her until she had reached the bottom step. And just like that, Emmeline had her first look at the thing that had taken up all her father's time. The thing into which he had poured all of his hopes, the thing he believed would bring Margot back. Even though the thing did not work, but had never worked, Emmeline was rendered speechless by the sight of it. It was a hulking thing, nearly as high as the ceiling. It was a great metal monster, with hundreds of bolts for eyes, and a rectangular mouth into which Emmeline supposed something was meant to be deposited, the way old clothes were deposited into a donation bin. The basement itself was dark, but the ghost machine created its own light once Emmeline reached the bottom step. A flickering, eerie purple glow that came through all the cracks and corners of the fused metal. It was unlike anything Emmeline had ever seen. She would never know how to describe such a thing, much less how to describe the way it made her feel, betrayed by her own sense of logic. She knew what machines were supposed to look like. She knew what death meant and that ghosts weren't real. But this machine, frightening and amazing at the same time. made her feel as though anything was possible. It might even be possible for her mother's ghost to emerge from this peculiar glow. She had expected her father to be angry with her for bursting into the basement, but when he saw the look of wonder on her face, he only smiled. So that's the end of chapter 1 of The Girl with the Ghost Machine. If you're interested in seeing how this story ends, you can go to the Washoe County Library website and see at the ways you can check it out. Thank you again for stopping by at First Chapter Fridays. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.